So we're happy to have BCTV filming for us tonight. That's an honor, and they always do a wonderful job. And I'd like to welcome everybody for being here on this beautiful evening together to support the arts, our community of artists, and especially our three New Hampshire artists, Maggie Cahoon, Jessie Pollock, and Erika Radich. Excuse me, I'm going to move over here. The show, Inner Landscapes, Three Views, gives the artists an opportunity to explore an inner or figurative world or thought, theme or idea, and they have responded in their own beautiful and stylized fashion. Maggie lets her swirls and veils of color take us to places without labels, sights beyond measure. Jessie worries and wonders about our earth and air and vanishing landscape, and has titled her presentation Petrichor, which is defined as a pleasant smell that frequently accompanies the first rain after a long period of warm, dry weather. Erika's main message is village, where even as one may feel isolated or out of sorts, we all find refuge and stability and a sense of lightness and hope. So tonight, each artist is going to give us a short introduction, and then we'll open up the floor to a lengthy question and answer. And Petey and I can grab small paintings from the walls if that'll prevent us from having to all turn our heads and crank around and walk around. So everybody can stay here, and we'll bring the paintings to you. So without any further ado, please welcome Maggie Cahoon, Jessie Pollock, and Erika Radich. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm really glad you're here. So I was just going to kind of wing it and just see what I was going to say, and then this morning I got a clear message. And some writing came through, so I'm just going to read that part, and then we'll take it from there with questions. Well, first of all, I should probably say that the paintings that you see in the front here are alcohol ink paintings, and they're done on a synthetic paper, which is a plastic paper. And the reason why is because if it was a cloth paper, or cotton paper, or rag paper, it would just right into the paper and it wouldn't move. This is called a fluid art, and it has a mind of its own. The line between controlling it and allowing it to do what it wants to do and have the magic that arises from its essence is very, very fine. This line is like just so thin, a razor's edge. And it's taken me many years to feel like I have some facility with it. So I will read this piece. It's a little, it is what it is. If you know my work and the arc of my creative life over the years, you know that I like and am compelled to push gently at the boundaries of what may be called ordinary and acceptable. I do have a fair amount of the rebel archetype within me. The work has, over the years, hinted at what is hidden, lying just beyond view, peeking into something other. I am fully aware of realms and orders of reality, if you will, that are beyond the one that presents itself in our daily lives. This current work, Beyond Measure, is an extension of that gazing into the hidden and unknown. This extension into abstraction is an expression of energetic forms using color and fluidity. I like to think of these pieces that come through as energetic signatures, implying way more than they actually are stating, an invitation, conceivably, to enter into a loving, unknown, full of beauty and color resonance, creating connection, engagement with parts that are not always available to us. Perhaps even moving into a state of awe. For me, this is an exciting landscape of exploration, very spacious, endlessly inspiring, and of course, beyond measure.
Yes, I'm Jessie Pollock. I live in New Hampshire in a very rural area by myself with my cat and a dog. And my muse is definitely nature. I feel blessed almost daily that I have the capability of living in this amazingly beautiful area. It's my muse. And I grew up in West Brattleboro, Vermont, of all places, and as an only child, so I had this sort of insular childhood, entertaining myself, walking through the woods with my marionettes, and talking to myself and my dog. So my muse has really become the mountains and the rocks and the air and the water, which is what I try to depict in my paintings. So I went to art school in Philadelphia and I majored in sculpture. I think we're either born a painter or a sculptor primarily. And then I moved back to New Hampshire and studied Renaissance painting. And somehow the combination of sculpture and Renaissance painting came together. So my favorite motif is the stone, because Vermont and New Hampshire grows stones, as you know. And so my background is primarily the elements, so water and mountain and earth. It's not really very original. It's just kind of what I feel. And again, as the world becomes more chaotic all the time, I still feel so incredibly blessed to be able to look out my window and see this amazing beauty that we have. And then the stripes on the large paintings, they are not about flags. They're more about the facade of barns, because I had a horse as a child and I love barns. And then I use the old art of, detritus, I call it, pieces of copper and old pieces of rusted hardware. So that's what my larger pieces are saying. Okay.
Okay, my turn. I guess I'm the only one left, right? Well, thank you all so much for being here. It's so great to see you. I've been a printmaker for 50 years, starting out in college with a few woodcuts. But it is the process that speaks to me, and these are prints. Even though there's a collage element, the ground is a print and a monotype, which is where I sort of landed after doing a bunch of different processes. Why printmaking? I ask myself, and I think it's because there's this great element of the unknown coming to work with you in the studio, and you just create this plate and you try to make the best of it and control all these little pieces of it, but then you submit it to the press and inevitably something else happens. And it's not true for every printmaker, but it is for me. For monotype particularly. There are some people that do really prescribed, beautiful systems, but I love monotype, and I love this freedom that comes with it. And these are all monotypes. The content and the inspiration for my work comes from the natural world. It's confounding to me that how everything works, the systems of the natural world, and how it keeps us alive with many different complexities. I was a biology major in college, and I was going the science route, and then I went to Germany for an overseas study, and got inundated by the most beautiful artwork, and mostly the German expressionists. And so they are, to me, my muse. I love the way that these people during a really difficult time had passion and courage and color, and were defiant of, you know, all the other things that were happening in the world at that time. Process, I get an idea, I do research, I go to my studio and I deconstruct that idea and create pieces and abstract it, and then I try to create a symbol that speaks to what I'm trying to say and expresses what I want to say. I used to work really literally and figuratively and did a lot of realistic work, and now I've just started doing more abstract work as I go along, and it's really satisfied my need for expressing myself. Years ago, I went to a MacDowell Colony Gold Medal Award banquet, and Betty Sayre was getting an award, and you may all know her. She's an amazing artist. She was 80, and she ended up saying, "You go, girl," at the end. She was amazing. But she described her artwork as the hunt, the transformation, and the release. And it made me feel so comfortable to hear that, because it is so true. You hunt, you research, and then you execute, and then the release is the formal, you know, engagement with the audience in some way, whatever way you choose or can. But the best part of my art life totally is ZMA's studio in Florence, Mass. I have been a member for 23 years, and I'm now a monitor, and it is a refuge for me, and it has been for all these years through everything. It's a studio. ZMA's means a plant. Is it a corn plant that sustains the soil and regenerates the soil? And the studio has created all this research to learn ways to do printmaking in a very safe environment. In the past, I've had to wear a gas mask to do printmaking, but not at ZMA's. And it's cutting edge. 20 years ago, a handful of studios in the world were doing this, and we exchange information with all different studios in New Zealand and Japan, Italy. It's amazing, and people come from all over the world to learn the ways we teach. Louder. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Oh, no. Anyway, thank you. So I'm lucky, and that was my refuge, and that brings me back to this work. It's refuge. It's a hopeful statement about our society and our friends and our neighbors and all the people that helped us during this really hard time with the pandemic. So that's my story. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess we're going to open it up for anybody who has questions.
Yeah, I've got one. I've got one for Maggie. How do you start? In other words, can we see the lines that you first put on there?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite.
I was wondering how you started doing a work. Can we see your lines that you started with, or do they get do they get layered under?
Oh, you mean in each piece?
In each piece, yeah.
I start with the idea that maybe I want to work with these 2 or 3 colors. The inks are very intense and concentrated, and I put them down. I sometimes just throw them down onto drops or dribbles onto the white paper. And then I add more alcohol. It's 99% isopropyl alcohol, which is medical grade alcohol. And then you take some kind of tool that will move the ink around. And I use a hairbrush, hair dryer, and low wattage, low heat, low air. You can use a mini air compressor. You can use a straw. You can tip it. So then the ink begins to move, and I can sometimes get it to go where I want, and sometimes not. On the bigger pieces, I've used 2 hair dryers at the same time. And it's kind of like a dance. So then the inks have a life of their own that I'm responding to all the time. I'm responding to them.
Thanks.
Is the synthetic paper UPO by any chance?
It's not UPO, but for those of you that know what she's talking about, there's a kind of paper, synthetic paper, plastic paper called UPO, which is perhaps the most well-known in the mainstream. I use a paper called Nara, which is I buy from India,
Really?
and I use that because it won't stain. You can take, if you don't like what's happening on the painting, the alcohol, you can just take a paper towel that is wet with alcohol and just wipe it off. UPO paper will stain. So sometimes, I mean, it can be really fun because you have a subtle image underneath, but to me, I don't care for that. I'd much rather have it go back to square one.
Great.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what was the name of the paper? You said it's plastic paper that you use?
I can't hear you.
What's the paper you use for that, for working with the alcohol inks is what?
It's a plastic paper.
And
It's called, oh, well, there's a type called UPO, Y-U-P-O. There's another called Craft Plastics. And then the paper that I use is Nara, N-A-R-A.
This is for Maggie. So if it doesn't absorb, are you able to remove the inks once they've dried?
Yes, you can. You can. I couldn't do it on these finished pieces because I've sprayed them with 2 coats of varnish and 2 coats of a UV protective spray. But up until that point, you can just spray, just wipe them off. Yeah.
I just want to make a comment that I'm so happy to hear that you spoke about finding something inside yourself that you didn't know that was there, and you expressed it in that. I just love the way you said that, because it was almost like so unconscious, really, about your process, and that's so much fun to discover.
It's really fun.
In those.
Yeah. It's a process of, it's a really deeply intuitive process, and it's a process, I do a lot of listening, and I call it visual listening.
When you're working?
Yeah, visual listening, like just like opening up my senses as well as my sight. And sometimes I can see beyond that, and that's what I call intuition. And I know just what to do. I know just what to do.
I have a question for Erika. Erika, I've seen your work over the last 10 years or so, and it seems like each time you have a show, it's different. There's a different focus, there's a different theme. Do you reach a point where like you've exhausted that idea and then you look for a new idea? How does that work? How do you go from one idea to the next?
Exactly that. I've been doing this collage work all through COVID, and I love doing collage. It's just been a real relief after, I'm sorry, I'm so softly spoken, yeah, exactly. I just do it till it ends. And then I find another idea, sometimes in the Sunday Times, sometimes in a film, in a book. I find a lot of my ideas from reading. And then I just start working on something else. That space in between is really uncomfortable, but it's still, important. Judy?
This is for Erika too. Your work is getting more and more complex, and I'm wondering how you even begin to assemble some of these. You know, do you have one piece that you really like and you build around it, or how do you do it?
Exactly. I start with one piece. I just randomly choose one piece, and then I build around it, and then I take a photograph of it before I try to glue it down, because I know I will forget if I don't do that. And so I have photographs of the unglued and the glued, and that helps me a lot. But yes, I just start with one piece and build around it.
And are your shapes ones that are already shaped and left over, like negative space shapes from something previous, or do you
They're
cut
all
them?
prints that have not been successful as in their entirety, and they're just torn up, and I tear them as I go along. Yeah. I have drawers of prints that didn't work.
Right, I imagine you have a lot of different scraps around,
That
so.
too. I have scraps and I have whole prints.
Okay.
Use a combination.
Erika, there seems to be a theme in this particular body of work. Would you mind talking about it?
Oh, it's definitely, during the pandemic, it felt very grim sometimes, and I don't usually use bright colors like this. My colors in my past work have been real earthy and sort of subtle, and people have always called my shows the quiet shows. And so I just decided that we needed to talk and we needed to express, and there's so much good that happened during the pandemic that it was positive. And I've tried to create something that's hopeful and the symbol of community, village, helping each other through hard times, that kind of thing.
That's lovely. Great. The source of these papers, are they from a variety of, I mean, I see some you like a tear, some you're carefully cut. Where do you find all your?
I have so many prints that I've made that never worked. They were just, I keep them because the paper is so beautiful. And you just don't throw this paper away. And so now I'm using them as pieces and elements in this work. So they're all repurposed prints, pretty much, almost all. There is some archival paper in there, but mostly it's my own work.
This is for Jessie. Hi, Jessie. I'm just curious about your evolution from sculpture to basically 2D. There's like a different D here because you're not 2D or 3D with these pieces, but so I'm curious about your evolution from studying of being a sculptor, which you still are. And then there's a second question. When did you start doing the windows with the rocks in them?
The windows, the niches, the cubby hole, the safe place. Actually, I forgot to bring a list I have on my studio wall of what the little, I call them niches, mean. It's a long list, but so I did sculpture for a long time, and then I moved to New Hampshire, and no one quite understood what I was doing. And the art world has become a lot more sophisticated here than it was 40 years ago.
Sure.
I mean, it was pretty prosaic back then. So then I studied with a man in my area who's very famous, passed away. He taught Renaissance painting, so I got all into Renaissance painting. And then I got real bored with the fruit in the bowl. I mean, I learned how to do it over and over. And so I felt I had to move on. So I became more abstract, but I missed the tangible object, I guess, because I am a sculptor. So I have no idea how it happened, but I have a film of myself cutting the first hole in a 6-foot painting to put a box in it. And I remember posting it online and saying, I think I'm going crazy. I just cut a hole in a beautiful big painting. Somehow it worked. I married the two parts of myself, from the painter and the sculptor. And I love rocks. I mean, I actually like the plain, ugly rock. I don't collect the beautiful quartz, you know, the glowing stone. I just think it's so emblematic of New England, and the stone walls, and the people who built the stone walls, the strength of them, carving a life out of this sort of unforgiving environment that we normally have. So it just was an evolutionary thing. And once I cut that first hole in that painting, it's what I keep doing.
What are some of the words that you use for the niches, for the cubby holes, that you have in your studio?
Yeah.
What are some of those words?
Oh, I wish I'd brought that. I really can't remember them all, but it was things like safety and keepers. Well, no, I'm sorry, I can't remember them.
No
I'm
problem.
just blanking on it. It is like that long. A whole lot of silliness I wrote down.
It sounds like they are the core issue of what you're trying to capture.
Yes, yeah. And, well, I guess I like to leave the interpretation up to the viewer. I think there are some words like relics. I'm very interested in anthropology. Comparative religion, though I'm not religious anymore, I'm spiritual. I think these are emblematic of that sort of what we dig out of the earth that reminds us of people before us. That's what the plain old stone is all about.
Maggie, how long have you been working in this realm? And before that, were you doing something quite different?
I've been working with the alcohol inks for, let's see, almost 4 years. And before that, I was doing encaustic painting for 5 or 6 years. And before that, I was doing polymer clay figure sculpting. And before that, I was doing some acrylic painting and what I call fiber collage, where I take fabrics and fuse them to paper and then collage them together with mixed media. And before that, I was a hand weaver and a hand dyer for 27 years. So, yeah, there's been a lot. I'm changing it. I change it up a lot. The reason how I got to alcohol ink was there, as I was doing encaustic, there was a woman on the West Coast in Seattle who I really wanted to study with, and she was doing shellac burn on encaustic, and she's amazing artist.
So much like Alicia Torme.
Alicia Torme.
So much like.
Yeah. So I went out and did a week with her, and she wasn't saying at that point, but in her paintings was alcohol ink in some of the layers. And I said to her studio assistant, I said, alcohol ink, and she said, mm-hmm. Yeah, she wasn't ready to, share it. And a couple of years later, she did an online class of alcohol ink, and I thought, I'm going to do this, I'm going to learn all about it, and I'm going to bring it back to my encaustic. And this spring, I packed up all my encaustic supplies and put them in the garage. I'm not going back to it. I just totally fell in love. Totally fell in love with this medium.
I went through sort of a similar thing as Maggie when I left sculpture, and I did the Renaissance training for a while. Then I fell in love with encaustic. Again, it's a step between the flat surface, and you can create these amazing depths with the encaustic wax, and you can see through it. And the alcohol ink. I got into the encaustic. I walked my dog every day by the pond, and I would look through the water, and I would see all the detritus on the sand at the bottom, and I'd think, I want to replicate that. And it was the encaustic that you could do that with. And then I moved on, like Maggie did.
Jessie, can you explain what cold wax is? Can you explain what cold wax is?
Yes, a lot of people who start out with encaustic move on to cold wax. But you can never quite achieve the transparency you can with encaustic. But encaustic has its issues too. It's very delicate. It chips or whatever. Cold wax, I just mix in like a paint medium, and then it hardens. And you can carve into it, and being a sculptor, that was really appealing.
So do you apply it as it's not cold, and then it becomes cold?
Yeah, it's very viscous. Apply it, and then you can manipulate it with tools.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
This is a question for Jessie also. So we have several keen-eyed visitors, and they've noticed some musical scores in some of your larger, the Vanishing Landscape paintings. And I was wondering what the musical scores are doing.
I think probably all three of us work in a studio alone with music. And so we're infused with music. I feel it's like in the air. You know, great musicians pull music out of the air. And my grandmother was a musician. I can't play an instrument, but I love music. So I like to incorporate it into my paintings in a very simplistic way.
The same question is for all three of you, and it does have to do with working in a solitary mode or whether you're working with others. Like I know Erika works with ZMAs, and Maggie, you teach, so I'm just really curious if you have some gems for us all to hear having to do with how you work, how you choose to work, whether you are excited by working alone or whether you really get an energy from working with other humans, or, yeah, all three of you.
I love working at ZMAs because the people there are so generous and so talented, and and ideas just osmotically sort of exchange. I don't think we directly influence each other, but it's all there, and I love that. And I love sharing a press. I don't like to work alone. I hate to say it, but I think that's why I go to ZMAs, and I would never want my own press. I just love going there and working with my community there.
I'm so the opposite. I have enjoyed teaching. That I have found rewarding, but basically I like to get in my own cloud out there, float around. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, I'm the exact opposite of Erika. I get totally distracted by people. I lose my focus. And the other thing about the solitude, I don't listen to music. in the studio. I don't ever listen to music because I can't hear. Whatever, I mean, and I say hear, you know, in quotation marks. I can't really quite articulate, but when I'm receiving messages, sometimes messages, like, and it all gets translated through my mind, of course, in my inner voice, but when others are around or there's music, I can't follow whatever this is that I'm following to the place where, you know, oh, that's it. And that's it doesn't mean that the painting is finished by any means or complete, but it might mean that that color, that's it. You know, that's what I've been looking for, or that shape in this area, or, however, I do teach, as Beatty says, I do teach. I've taught at River Gallery, and in all the mediums that I've done, I've taught, and I do teach in my studio, small groups. And I love sharing the excitement of that medium, the particular medium. And I just love showing people, when it was encaustic, I'm like, look at what this can do, and it's molten, and then it gets hard, and then you take a torch and you put fire on it, and, you know, or the alcohol is like, wow, look at what these colors do and how they move. Yeah, so it's both, but when I'm actually working on my art, I don't want to be distracted by noise, by animals, by people.
Animals.
Just go down a rabbit hole.
Like my studio, got animals and music.
It's so interesting how we're all so different. You know, I love that. I love that diversity. Yeah.
I have a question for Erika. You know, in all your words you've used to describe your work, you haven't said architecture. And I feel like these are so architectural. And I know you've traveled so much, and they feel like, you know, different world architectures. I wonder if you could speak to that at all.
Well, you know, there's a global entity to Village. And also, my mother loved Lionel Feininger. And so I grew up with a lot of him around. And I love that sort of structure. And I am sort of that controlling kind of person that likes structure, Girl Scout type, you know. And so it is architectural in some way, but it's also sort of irreverent architecture, you know, just not things that don't really match and fall into each other. And that's another part of it. Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you. Yeah.
I have a question. I don't know who wants to answer it, but I always wonder, when do you know it's finished? Because, you know, I've dabbled in doing things, but I just say, when do you know, like, you know, even Jessie with yours, with layers that you do, how do you know when it's done?
Sorry,
how do you know when it's finished?
Oh,
such a good.
That's so.
When you take a picture of it.
Sometimes I work on a painting a year or two later, because I've changed and I've grown, and I think, wow, that is not developed as much as it should be. And I say, be very careful, but sometimes, I go in it again, you know, add more, cut another hole. Yeah, it's very amorphous.
That's a great question.
I have the experience a lot of working on a piece for a few hours or longer, and for several days, and then getting to a place where it's like, I can't see this anymore. I can't see it. And I have some tricks. I have what's called a reducing glass, which is the opposite of a magnifying glass. So you look through it and it makes it look small. That's helpful so you can get some distance. I also have a hand mirror where the painting is you guys, and I turn around and I look in the mirror at the painting. That's helpful because it's a mirror image, so you begin to see things differently. Those are just techniques, but what I wanted to say was that when I can leave the studio and feel like, oh, I just want to pull my hair out, or I'm frustrated or upset, not upset, but disappointed that it wasn't flowing as well, and I, the critic, then the critic starts, telling you stories. And then I'll come in the next morning or the next day or 2 or 3 days later and I'll go like, oh, it's not so bad. And that's just that process is so curious to me. I love that process, like that push and pull between objectivity and subjectivity and seeing and not seeing. I just find it fascinating. So I've learned to be patient. I've learned to be patient.
It's the volume of the critic.
It's the volume?
It's the volume of the critic that prevents you from seeing, I find. When it's, when it's loud.
Yeah, you can't see it. Yeah. Thank you. That's great.
I'm enormously curious. There appears to be metal flecks.
Yes.
Gold or silver?
Yes, there's a gold. It's not quite an ink. It's more like a pigment with some glycerin, so it makes it thicker than the inks, which are just alcohol and dye. And it floats on the alcohol, and it moves in different ways, and it's really, really hard.
It's really, really beautiful.
It is, when it works, it's really, really beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Erika, you didn't answer that question of when you know
When it's finished. Well, it depends. With this particular work, it is truly when I decide to take the photograph and glue it down. And it's just, with other work, I have the same issues that you have. I don't know if it's finished, and sometimes I often overwork something and ruin it. With printmaking, it's easy to do, but I try to leave it alone for a while and check it out later. But I have trouble with that. I don't always know when I'm finished. Not this work, but when I do a monotype or another kind of print. I just struggle with that.
I do just want to say one more thing, though, about knowing when it's finished. There are times, and they're more often than not, when you know it. You just know it. You just know. Ta-da, it's done. And that you can't explain, really.
Yes.
Erika, I'm looking at the tags on at least this one that I can read, which is a monotype. Now, did this go through a press?
They all have ultimately gone through a press.
So did you?
But just to explain it, the ground, the ink in the back went through a press.
Okay.
And then after I've glued everything down and used a bone folder around the edges, I then put it through a press also to just make sure it stays.
Thanks.
I'm curious about how scale, size is an issue or something that you work with. Because I know, Maggie, you were very intrigued by going large. And that was kind of an important part of this particular exhibit was the scale for you. Yeah. I'm curious about all three of you with that question.
It's easy to work small.
It's easy to work small?
Or easy to work small, and then, or easier. And there's something about, I challenged myself to work bigger because I didn't know how to do it, and I wanted again to learn something. And I found that in working large, I can express different things, or different things get expressed that don't. And you can kind of see it in the smaller work as opposed to the bigger work. Yeah, there's something magic about working large in the unknown of that, and it's so much land, so much real estate, you know, so you have to really, I find I have to really enlarge my peripheral vision, so to speak. So when I'm working over here and the inks are moving over here, I have to, you know, be aware of that. So there's a lot of dancing, I think, around that I don't find happens when I'm working small.
I think there's an engagement physically when you work larger. I mean, you become the human scale. It's almost like a one-on-one.
Yeah.
I have the same thing. I go from small, which is very intimate and nice, but when I work large, it's like body to body with a whole different
It's
feeling.
different feel, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, printmaking's very different. That's large for me.
Yeah.
And, you know, there is a limitation of the press. We do have a really large press. And I did struggle with some linoleum blocks that were long and narrow. And it was like the struggle with God. I mean, I felt like they were winning all the time. And I had to get them to be straight and to line up. And so it is huge. And this is huge for me. So.
This is a question for Maggie. Do you crop your pieces? Do you crop your pieces when you're finished, or do you start with a particular format and then you stay with that?
Yeah. The smaller pieces, the 10 by 10s, the 12 by 12s, and any sizes in between, are cropped usually from a larger. And I do believe that even in an unsuccessful painting, I have a mat board and I move it around. You can always find a successful painting. It might be small. But the larger pieces, I do start, for the two very large ones and the one in the front window, I did say 36 by 48. So I work a tiny bit bigger, I work like an inch bigger, maybe on all sides, and then they get cropped.
How do you cut them?
I cut them with a very sharp knife and a long ruler and on a big table. Yeah, carefully.
Do you know they're going to be cropped before you really get into it?
I know that the big ones are going to be cropped, just tidied up. No, I don't always know that. One of the tall, Peter, can you go over to the rectangle, vertical rectangle? This one closest to me.
This one?
Yeah. This one, which is 4 by 24, I think, 6 by 24. And it started out as actually I got 3 paintings out of it, only one of them is in the show. So it started out with about a 24 by 24 piece. So there was some waste, but yeah. Yeah, and that was one of them. The big one wasn't really quite working, so I started playing around.
So you just take a viewfinder and
I
just
take a mat board, I want to have a finished 6 by 24, and then I just move it around until I find what's working. Yeah. Some people might say it's cheating, but I think it's like a process of discovery, you know? It's like mining for gold.
You're in good company. Franz Klein did that as well.
Who did?
Franz Klein.
Oh, okay, all right.
He would project from across his studio, pick out a small piece, and work on that. I love the drama in that piece. It's very daring.
Another question for Jessie. You have several paintings here which are in pairs or even triples. And I'm wondering, do you work on those one at a time or all 3 or 2 or 3 together? Like the series Umbria, for instance. The two are very similar with slight differences.
I work on a lot of paintings at the same time because of the atmosphere think layers don't dry, and if I come in with another layer, it will turn to mud. So I usually have 6 or 8 paintings going at a time, all sizes. And that way, if you mix up the colors, you use it all up. It's not an inexpensive thing to be an artist with cost of paint. And I use a lot of dry pigment also. So yeah, I work on a lot at once.
It feels like you're sequencing.
Sort of, yeah,
And
yeah.
something that we've seen a lot of around here. It's beautiful. It's wonderful to see the differences.
Thank you, thank you.
I'm really curious what artists have influenced all three of you from the beginning of your art making and even now. What are artists that really have affected you?
Is that for all of us?
Everyone. Yeah. You don't have to take a half an hour each. I'm just really interested in.
You go.
You go first.
Or you don't have to answer either.
Well, that piece that I just showed you, that Petey was just holding, is, to me, that's an Emily Mason piece.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she's influenced me quite a bit, as well as Wolf Kahn, in terms of their color in all sorts of ways, but color especially. Milton Avery has been a strong influence over the years. Then this woman that I studied with out in Seattle, Alicia Torme. Yeah, that's what's coming up right away, but maybe more will come up as you guys speak. Yeah.
Well, I studied, I came across a woman named Rebecca Kroll. Kroll. She lived in Minnesota. So I was in Florida and I got on a plane and I flew to Minnesota in the dead of winter. I went to Walmart and bought winter clothes and I had nothing with me. And I studied with her for 3 days in her own studio. And since then, she has written what we call the Bible. It's this big book with every technique you can do with cold wax. She hooked up with a man who has since moved to San Miguel de Allende, and he's teaching the techniques as well. And I went to Ireland with Rebecca for a residency. That was fabulous. And again, I'm surrounded by stones, water, and this amazing atmosphere and weather. And she works completely abstractly. So she's my contemporary influence. I mean, I have lots from believe it or not, Caravaggio, but you know, you can name going way back hundreds of years. But it's a whole movement in contemporary art of using the cold wax. It's really exciting.
I read this book that was called Tales from the Underground, and it was by a scientist who taught at Cornell, and it was basically a love story about soil, and it was so good, and I did so much work from that. But when I think of artists that, like, it's subliminal, Kata Kulwitz is one of my very favorite artists. Matisse with all the patterns. When I did woodcuts, I did a lot of patterns that, for me, I just loved Matisse, and I remember he was really important. And the German Expressionists, Edvard Munch, not the Scream, but many other works of his, and Klee. There are just so many wonderful artists that, you know, it just never ends. and they're always there. They're always sort of working in your subconscious mind and heart, I think. Can't think, it's Emil Nolde, Schmidt, Rottluff, Weininger, even though my mother, I didn't love it, it was important. Yeah.
Other questions?
Well, I would like to ask Thompson, if you don't mind, because we know you are established artists. And what I was thinking about, when was that moment in your life growing up that you knew, oh, this is what I'm gonna do with my life? How old were you? Were children, young girls? What inspired you to go that way?
Such a great question. When did you start knowing you were an artist of sorts? What ignited your artistic journey? I can say I always tried to figure out how to draw things. My mother would show me how to make puffy sleeves, and I was so happy. And in third grade, I remember my third grade teacher let me get out of class so I could do a mural on the wall, and I didn't have to do math or something. It was just so exciting. And then I think always it's been there for me, just trying to make things look like I wanted them to look. But like I said, when I went to Germany, when I discovered the German Expressionists, that was a big thing for me, and a big turning point. It's a great question. Yeah.
Well, long story short, I can remember myself in kindergarten with finger paints. And I could see myself still sitting on the floor with my fingers, little fingers, doing this, and the finger paint felt so wonderful. And I've never forgotten that feeling. So I think it was always there. Yeah, it was always there.
Yeah, I'm remembering that when I was 6 years old, my mother signed me up for an oil painting class for kids, of course. And for years I had that picture of a horse. When I was in college, I took a weaving class that was at the library, the town library, not through the college. And because I had seen a weaver in Hyannis in a little cottage throwing the shuttle, and it was just like so compelling, I guess, to me. So when I had the opportunity to become a weaver or to learn how to weave, I jumped at it. And I've never stopped creating since that point, really consistently creating. And in fact, I was just telling this story to somebody yesterday that I was at a meditation retreat, 10-day, 12-day meditation retreat, and it was silent, and it was a lot of meditation, and it was no devices, no reading, nothing other than just presence, And I went into the kitchen after the third day and I said, can I please just chop vegetables? I just want to create something. I just needed to create like a beautiful pile of once that gate is open to creativity, it's hard to close it. It's hard to close it.
Nor would you want to close it.
No. Oh, it'd be kind of death.
I got a question, unless somebody else is hungry to ask one. Somebody asked me this question, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago. If you had, let's say, a month left to live, what kind of creativity would you get involved with? What would you create, do you think? Or is that just not fair?
Chaos.
Chaos.
No, I think I would go right out to the studio and keep painting. Yep.
Any specific imagery or scale or
No,
materials?
I would
or-
just keep doing this. Yeah.
This is so interesting you asked that question. I was just visiting friends a week ago or so, and the husband of my good friend said, well, if you had 6 months to live, what would you do? It's very similar. And I said, Scotland. I go to Scotland. But in terms of creativity, I don't know. I don't know.
I think I'd make a book for each one of my grandchildren.
You can make a book, Erika?
Yeah,
Yeah?
just I would do something to leave to them.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh.
If
No
I'd-
text, image and text, or?
I don't know,
Hmm.
not sure.
Interesting.
But I would want to leave something especially for them, I think.
I like that.
But that's such a hard question.
That's really, a month is not.
How fast can you work?
I know, that's very sweet.
Anybody else?
Are there any
Well-
questions? That's right.
Yes, I just want to thank Erika and Jessie and Maggie and Maria for the photography, for the video, and for everybody here. It's been a wonderful evening. We always enjoy doing this. Please come back, and thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
One more thing. Thank you, Petey and Jim.
Yes.
Yes.
Me too.
So this is like my little niche.
You cut the hole. I realize how much sturdier it is than I first thought. I thought it looked like cardboard, but I think it's
No, I have these made. I have someone makes the boxes for
Are they
me.
metal?
I buy the panel, and I've always worked on a hard panel surface.
Now, when you use the cold wax, are you mixing it with
It
the
mixes
paint?
in with the paint,
With the powdered?
and then this here,
With oil paint? or-
yes, this here I have poured turpentine on it. There are many, many layers, and then I pour the turpentine on it, and I let it sit. And then I take a squeegee and I scrape it back. So this is going back into, the red is my first layer.
The whole process.
It's a process.
It's quite,
Yeah.
quite beautiful.